Welcome to Conversations. I'm Barbara Kanellopoulos, and Conversations is a new program that will be shown monthly on Channel 13. It's an opportunity to listen to people whom you may or may not know who have something to say. I do hope you'll tune in and listen to their stories. Today I'm with Jim Butler, who has a story to tell. And in fact, Jim, you not only have a story to tell, but you have written a book about it. Not everyone is able to do this. 270 packed pages of your life. So welcome to Conversations. Tell us something about your idea, what reader you had in mind when you sat down to write this story.
Well, first let me say thank you for having me on your program, Barbara. I'm glad that it is the inaugural program for this series. Good question. I had the audience in mind of one or two people. It never dawned on me that the story that I was about to tell about myself was going to go beyond my family. I wrote the book with my daughter and my son in mind, and hopefully their children and their children's children. It was very important to me that I leave an undistorted and clear footprint about who I was and what I did, and hopefully be able to transmit that love that I had for them within the framework of a book. So it started out with the audience of just my immediate family, and well, it has blossomed a little bit beyond that.
That's an impulse that many people have. I think it's very common now to hear from grandparents and parents that they want to leave a memoir. And it is the story of your struggle with substance abuse as well.
Well, that's part of my story later on in life, and I hope we can get into that at some point. But funny that you say that everybody, I believe also, that everybody has a story to tell.
Yes,
you know?
Yes.
And another thing that prompted me to tell my story in the most brutally honest fashion, to not paint pictures of myself that would work well for my children and grandchildren, but I wanted them to see me in the raw, you know. And so I had an instance early on in my own childhood when I was about 5 years old, and I grew up in a single-parent household in Harlem, USA, on the other side, the wrong side of the tracks. And but we had a strong family. It was a single-parent household, but it was a strong nuclear family unit in that we drew strength from each other. And so early on, my mother and my brother being 3 years older than me, and my mother, we had a pact that we would never lie to each other, that we were there for each other under any and all circumstances, and that the one thing that we would not do would be to lie to each other.
And then when you were 5 years old, what did you find out?
Right, that my mother and brother had, you know, my father was part of our family at that point, and but he was about to go off to war. The Korean War was raging at that time. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in '46, so this happened around 1951 or so, for those of us old enough to appreciate that the Korean War was at its height at that time, and so men were being called to arms. And so he took me aside and told me that he had to go off to war, and and he charged me to, you know, be the man-child, you know, to protect my family in the event that something happened to him. And so, I mean, I was proud to be entrusted with this kind of thing. But some years later, 3 or 4 years to be exact, one of my friends' parents told me that my mother and brother had lied to me, that my father had not been off on the front lines of glory somewhere, you know, and that he was in fact a federal prisoner doing time for armed bank robbery, among other things. And I couldn't believe it. It shocked me so that they would call my mother and brother liars. And so I was prepared to defend that. And so I went back and told my mother what had happened, and she told me the truth, that she had in fact sheltered me from the harsh reality of my father being incarcerated, and so to protect me had told me this falsehood, who, you know, told me less than honest truth. And so I vowed, maybe not at that point, but later on in life, that if I ever had children, that I would never distort their reality. I mean, there's some things that, you know, have to be sensitive about how you present the truth to a child, but to tell a child an absolute falsehood, I think you run a very serious risk. And so it happened to me that my whole perception of the world had changed at that point, because now I couldn't trust anybody.
I see. So I understand now then why you have so many details of your life here. It really is very candid and very interesting.
Yes.
And so you grew up in Harlem, which you call a reservation.
Yes. Well, I allude to it in chapter 1 of the book. You know, I try to give a sense of context of who I am. The book is written through the eyes of myself at different stages of my life, you know, and so it's not an overview of what was. It's written from a what is standpoint, you know, and so I talk about my immediate environment, and I realized that, you know, we were all black people. You know, I lived in a world that was predominantly black. You know, there were some other ethnic persuasions. There were the Irish policemen, there were the Jewish school teachers, there were the absentee landlords, there were the Germans, you know, all these people who were there in the daytime for commerce, but when the sun went down, it was a totally black environment. And so it started to dawn on me that we were contained. And so I allude to that sense of containment as having lived on a reservation.
Right. Yeah, I see, I see. And so we grew up in Harlem at a pretty tumultuous time. The civil rights movement was certainly burgeoning. And then you write about being influenced by Malcolm X.
Well, yes, Malcolm played a significant influence on me, but more to your immediate point, yes, America at that point was at a very critical juncture of its own metamorphosis as a country, and so there was the air was ripe with contradiction, you know, and so there was what resonated in my community and what I saw in the newspapers, that people were wanting their freedom. And freedom from what and who and all that kind of stuff. It was what the challenge, the intellectual challenge, was for a young kid like myself. And so I was always curious, and so I gravitated toward things and people that would give me some additional answers to put my life in perspective, you know. And so Malcolm at that particular time had a mosque or a meeting place just around the corner from where I lived at, and so it was, you know, I was curious, adventurous, and so I would cut class or immediately after school, and I'd go there and I'd sit at his feet, so to speak, and the knowledge that he gave me of his perspective on the world and the conditions of the people that I saw as my people, you know, and that could be changed if we did certain things and came together around certain things. And so that influenced me greatly throughout the rest of my life. I was not an adherent to his religious persuasion, but his social, he was a patriot in the truest sense of the word, but he was a nationalist. He wanted economic prosperity for his own people, you know, and so that was not hard for a kid like me to embrace. Yeah.
Now, you experimented with marijuana early on and got into some trouble because of it.
Well, yes. I, like everybody else that I knew at the time, marijuana was not this abstract. It was not this. It seemed somewhat commonplace, you know, in the environment. The adult community, it seemed somewhat now it was still an illicit drug, you know, it was still not legal, but it was semi-legal, you know, in that people could talk about smoking marijuana
Sure,
as
well,
openly as
yeah.
they talked about drinking.
Sure, there's no question that it's very prevalent.
Yeah, so there's no stigma associated with marijuana. So I don't want you to give the impression that, you know, I got into illegal substances right away, because in my mind there was nothing illegal about marijuana unless you got caught selling it or something like that. But I wasn't a seller, you know, I was just a normal kid. And so I had an instance where a friend and I were in the park. I think I was 16 years old. And
Morningside Heights.
Morningside Park, right. Yeah. And Morningside Heights is the dividing line, the border, the westernmost border of Harlem. And on the other side of that border is Columbia University and St. Luke's Hospital, and a very affluent world overlooking Harlem. And so there was a policeman standing on the overlooking, looking down at me and a friend of mine who happened to be toting on a marijuana joint. And he told us to stop, you know, and while we waited for him to come around and come down and all that kind of stuff, and he came to us, and he wound up finding some marijuana on the ground, and took us to jail. Yeah. You know.
You did time at Rikers?
Well, not for that.
Oh, I see.
No, that was much later. That was much later. But
see.
So what I'm saying is, drugs was not prevalent in my life at that point. Drugs didn't come on the scene in my life until I was well into my adult years, and then drugs were, Harlem was saturated with drugs, you know, with heroin and cocaine and stuff like that.
I know, and you know, I was thinking when I read that section, when you began selling, wasn't there a famous bank robber, and somebody said to him, "Why do you rob banks?"
Willie Sutton.
Willie Sutton. And he
said, that's where the money is.
That's where the money is. And so as I'm reading this, you get into selling drugs because that's where the money was.
Well, you remember the reservation concept now. And what was available on the reservation in terms of livelihood, in terms of upward mobility, you know, because for most of the people in Harlem, where I grew up at, money was almost like a god. And so money was the great leveling of the playing field. And if you had money, you had social status. If you had things, if you had social trappings of success, then you were a successful person. You know, at least that was through my eyes at that age. You know, and so so I gravitated toward all of those kind of things.
Within not too many other opportunities.
Well, I have to clarify that point for you too, Barbara, because you know I don't want to present myself as a victim of the environment, because within that environment now, you have to remember now that Harlem was likewise, although you may see it from the outside as an impoverished community, it was anything but impoverished. Harlem had the richest culture and of any group of people in America. You know, all of your, at least it was the capital of the black world, and so all of your most famous individuals in whatever field of endeavor had a connection to Harlem, you know, from the political arena, Dr. Ralph Bunche, UN, you know, politicians, Adam Clayton Powell, Malcolm X, you know, Colin Powell eventually, all of your greatest entertainers, all of your best writers, Countee Cullen, Langston Hughes, Richard Wright. I mean, they all had their genesis in Harlem, you know, and so Harlem had a rich and vibrant culture, you know, but it was layered, and so at the bottom, the most people were at the bottom layer. But they were layers, and
so economic inequality then.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and because of the containment, seemed like containment policies of the time. You got to remember, the America was at odds with itself. It was at a cross section in its own history, in which it was almost like a black versus white civil war being relived again, and so in the South it was for rights of one form of fashion or another, voting and stuff like that. In the North it was economic power, and so it was a very volatile era.
But But what is very interesting about the book and the way you write, you definitely make it clear that this was a choice, that
Absolutely.
You're very candid about that.
Absolutely.
That this was a choice. And you struggled with it. And so this is probably why we have that metaphor of the metamorphosis, that the struggling to become a more, say, autonomous person.
The biggest challenge for me, Barbara, was that period of time, very defining period of time, when I went into the military and came out, and the war was raging in Vietnam at the time, and but at the same time that war was raging externally in America, that internally was the civil rights struggle. The war for equality, the war to be recognized as human beings, to be recognized as no longer second-class citizens. And so you had people coming back from the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and you know, and they wanted entry into society, you know, without stigma. And so when I came back, you know, from my brief service in the military, what was I going to do? What road, what pathway was I going to take, you know, to reach this American dream? I mean, what was I going to do? And so my options, I made several bad choices, you know, but they were choices nonetheless that I wasn't lifetime committed to, but they were choices I needed to pursue to eventually allow that to run its course in my life, so that I can say that that's not the way to go, you know. So I'd like to think that there are lessons inherent in the book that are things to do and things to not do, you know. So I want to be that brutally honest with my children, and so since I consider all the young people of the world my children to a certain extent, you know, I want to be that brutally honest with my reading audience.
And as you struggled through the years to achieve something and to become free of drugs, certain experiences brought you to the drug that is legal and very prevalent, and that was alcohol. And you struggled with that quite a lot.
Well, you know, I have come to, over the years, through the process of trial and error, you know, come to the conclusion that a drug is a drug is a drug, and alcohol is just another drug. It just happens to be a legal drug, you know, and but in my consumption and utilization and use and eventually abuse of alcohol, you know, I've come to the conclusion that it was the worst of all the drugs. You know, it robbed me of my sense and purposefulness, my sense of myself, on a level that the heroin or marijuana or any other illicit drugs that I may have experimented with never did. You know, so because it's the legality of it, it can take a longer period of time to take a toll on you.
Right, and it's socially acceptable.
And it's socially acceptable, you know, except when it gets to the point of being, you know, alcohol. And I need to make this point because a lot of talk has been around the substance abuse aspects in the book, and it does have much relevance to that. But to me, the underlying causes of the substance abuse is what happened to me as a young person, and that was being affected with the disease of meism. You know, that I was self-centered in the extreme, that I was a searching and inquisitive young person and was not getting the answers from my immediate environment that I needed in order to give me that sense of poise and equilibrium that would allow me to have a certain predictable trajectory in life. But so I, in an effort to get outside myself, I experimented with different kinds of drugs. It was only a matter of time before alcohol caught up with me or anything else. But I was inclined, and I think that we can see that in our young people today, that some of them are disillusioned, and some of them don't have anybody to talk to about what it is that they actually want or what it is they actually see. They're not getting the answers. And I think that we can solve the problem that has taken the lives of so many of our young people today, these opiates, illicit drugs, and lifestyle, and just the whole cultural pulling apart at the seams of the fabric of America, you know, and it's just happening here right now, but if we don't contain it here, it'll be in another state next year and in another state. But we have an opportunity right now to open up some discussion and some candid dialogue at the very earliest stages of our interaction with our young people.
Yes, you do believe very much in communication, especially within the family.
Absolutely. That's the core. That's the solution to most all of our problems. Starts in the living rooms and the dining tables of our homes. You know, when communication breaks down there, or is distorted there, or some false image of the world is presented there, then it's going to be disillusionment on the part of the children, and it's going to be an hypocrisy on the part of the adults. And each of those component parts will be in their own sense of denial.
Right. Now, I understand that there's going to be a reception for you at the State House in Boston.
Well,
can you tell us something about that?
I've been very blessed. I've been, and here, you know, I don't want to get spooky and overly spiritual, but everything that I have done has been direct blessing from God. You know, I believe that God had a hedge around me all my life that it only allowed me to go so far. And so I went as far as I could go with drugs, with alcohol, with all of those things. And then he got my attention to write this book and tell my story. So the story has resonated. I just retired here to Falmouth 3 years ago. And out of that retirement and that peace of mind and the atmosphere conducive to coming to terms with myself, I was able to write this book, and it's been so well received here in my immediate environment. My hat is really off to the people and institutions of Falmouth, and now it's starting to move out in waves, and so I just did a book signing at Seacrest and one at New Seabury. These are very upscale places, but the next thing that I'm doing is mind-boggling for myself, and that we've been invited to host a forum at the State House on Beacon Hill, and that's coming up on November 20th. And it's going to be a forum around some of the issues that we've discussed. There's going to be a representative from the Department of Mental Health. There's going to be a representative from the educational community, and all showing the different applications that this book may have and bring to bear on some of the social dilemma that we find ourselves in. And out of that, I don't know where it goes from there. I'm pretty sure that we'll be on to New York and Washington and on and on and on. But it's exciting times for me.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, and yes, it is. State House, Barbara.
Yes, I know. That's really great. That's great. And I think you made the point before that that every individual is different, that and their resolutions of their problems come. Sometimes it's through early intervention. Sometimes it's through a spiritual awakening, as happened to you.
Absolutely.
And so all of these will be discussed, looking for ways in which we can help people who are abusing substances.
Absolutely. And my heart goes out to all of those people who you know, this is a family disease. Addiction is a family disease, and although you think of the addict as the person most affected by it, the truth of the matter is that the whole family and then the whole community is likewise affected in the problem, and they also have to be likewise involved in the solution. And the solution comes with some candid and open discussion at the various earliest levels. Yeah. So I want this book to be in the schools and the churches and the other various institutions around that are social institutions, and let's start a dialogue about the solution and not about the problem so much.
Involving community too, which and
Absolutely.
many aspects of the community too.
Absolutely.
Have you been back to Harlem lately? I'm curious about whether or not the changes are made. Don't tell me that there's gentrification going on in Harlem as it is in other places.
Gentrification as a concept is an understatement if you go to Harlem.
Really?
Absolutely. You know, I didn't recognize my Harlem when I went. You know, you know, I had a certain love for the Harlem that I remembered.
Yeah.
You know, But when I went back, I didn't recognize it. Where I used to live at is now a high-rise condominium. It's a tree-lined street, and all of the streets in the neighborhood that I lived in are now all condominiums. And you would walk down 8th Avenue, where there used to be nothing but liquor stores and bars and bodegas and all that kind of stuff. And now there are coffee shops and outdoor restaurants, and you know, it was like, whoa. And the complexion has changed. Those people are not black anymore. Those people look like you, and look, you know, it's wow. I thought I had arrived on another plane. I thought I got off on the wrong exit of the turnpike or something.
That is interesting. I had no idea.
Yes, gentrification is alive and well in Harlem.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And that's okay.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anybody, the point I like to make more than anything is that anybody can succeed in Harlem, irrespective of where they started from. It's a question of believing in yourself and plugging into a network of other people willing to believe in you also, opening some lines of dialogue and communication that express you being the best that you can possibly be.
That is a very good message, a really important message. And I want to thank you so much for being with us and telling us your story and sharing with us the book Metamorphosis in Black. And viewers will be able to see your website on our screen. And thank you again very much for being here,
and I'd like to extend an open invitation, not only to yourself, but your entire viewing audience. The events at the State House are absolutely free, open to the public. And in fact, we're going to have some young people going on tours that day of the State House.
Great.
So everybody, come on down to the Beacon Hill.
Thank you.